I should have seen it coming. The way Marcus's eyes lingered on his phone during dinner, the unexplained business trips, the sudden coldness in his touch. But when you're drowning in love and trust, you don't notice the hands pushing you deeper underwater. My name is Victoria Ashford, and I died at 28 with my sister's blood on my hands and poison burning through my veins. Celeste and I had everything. The Ashford fortune, built over 5 generations, made us untouchable, or so we believed. Twin heiresses to a shipping empire worth $12 billion. We were each other's closest confidant, best friend, and only family after our parents died in that convenient plane crash 3 years ago. At least we have each other, Celeste had whispered at their funeral, her perfectly manicured fingers intertwined with mine. Always and forever, Vic. Always and forever. The irony tastes like bitter almonds now. I married Marcus Sterling, the charming investment banker who swept me off my feet at a charity gala. Celeste married his best friend, David Chen, a tech mogul whose startup I'd actually funded early on. We thought we were so clever, marrying best friends, ensuring our tight-knit bond would never break. We were idiots. Her name was Sophia Reeves, and she was a masterpiece of deception, wrapped in silk and sweetness. Petite, with doe-like brown eyes and a voice like honey, she looked like she belonged teaching Sunday school, not orchestrating murders. She came to us as a grief counselor, specializing in helping wealthy families through transitions. A mutual friend had recommended her services after our parents' deaths. How convenient. "I just want to help you heal," she said during our first session, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. Losing parents so young, it's one of life's cruelest trials. But I believe everything happens for a reason. The reason, we later learned, was $12 billion. Sophia was brilliant. She never pushed, never suggested anything directly. Instead, she asked innocent questions that planted seeds of doubt. She'd tilt her head with concern and wonder aloud if perhaps Marcus seemed stressed because he was worried about providing for me. Maybe his secrecy was protectiveness. Maybe his lies were loving sacrifice. She made their neglect seem noble, their deception romantic, their slow poisoning of our trust an act of devotion. Over 18 months, Sophia became integral to our lives. She attended our dinner parties, joined our trips, was present for every milestone, and she was feeding everything back to our husbands. The suggestions were surgical in their precision. When I mentioned feeling restless about the business, she'd wonder if perhaps I was unconsciously seeking more partnership in my marriage. When Celeste expressed frustration with David's distance, Sophia would suggest that maybe he needed to feel more trusted with important decisions. "Have you considered," she said one afternoon as we sat in my garden, "that Marcus might feel overwhelmed by your independence? Some men need to feel needed. It's not weakness, it's how they show love." Her words felt like wisdom. I thanked her for the insight and signed over my power of attorney that same week. Meanwhile, she worked identical magic on Celeste. Every doubt, every insecurity, every moment of marital friction was carefully tended until we were willingly handing over the keys to our own destruction. It happened on our second wedding anniversary. Marcus suggested an intimate dinner at home, just the 4 of us, like old times. He cooked, which should have been my first warning. Marcus never cooked. Sophia arrived unexpectedly just as we sat down, clutching a small gift bag with trembling hands. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your celebration," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I just wanted to drop off these photos from our spa weekend. I was so touched to be included in such precious memories." The performance was flawless. We insisted she stay. She protested sweetly. We won. It felt natural, spontaneous, loving. "To love," Marcus toasted, raising his wine glass. "To the people who make life worth living." Sophia lifted her glass of water. She never drank alcohol, always the responsible one, and added, "To family, the kind you choose and the kind that chooses you." The poison worked quickly. Celeste collapsed first, her face gray with agony. As I fell beside her, convulsing and choking, I watched Sophia's expression transform. The sweet concern evaporated, replaced by cold satisfaction. "Oh dear," she said softly, her voice still honey-sweet, but now laced with triumph. "I think something's wrong with the food." She pulled out her phone with steady hands, no panic, no shock, just clinical efficiency. 911? "Yes, there's been a terrible accident. Food poisoning, I think. 2 young women. It looks very serious." The last thing I saw was her dabbing fake tears from her eyes, while Marcus and David stood over our dying bodies, already mentally counting their inheritance. I woke up screaming, but I wasn't dead. I was in my childhood bedroom, wearing the black dress from our parents' funeral 3 years ago. Before Marcus, before David, before that angel-faced demon destroyed our lives. My phone buzzed. Celeste. Nightmare? I dreamed we died. Poisoned. Marcus, David. And some sweet-faced bitch named Sophia. I stared at the text, my hands shaking. Meet me at the oak tree. We need to talk. Under our childhood oak tree, we pieced together the impossible truth. We remembered everything. Every manipulation, every lie, every moment of our systematic destruction. And we remembered dying. This time, Celeste said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. We don't fall for it. We know their playbook. This time, I agreed, we play with them. Let them think they're winning, while we destroy them piece by piece. We spent hours planning. No marriages this time. We'd let them court us, spend fortunes pursuing us, invest everything in a payoff that would never come. And when they were completely committed, financially and emotionally, we'd crush them. 3 weeks later, I was examining heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market when someone collided with me from behind. Strong hands caught me before I could fall, steadying me with surprising gentleness. Christ, I'm sorry. Are you hurt? I turned to face deep gray eyes set in a face that was handsome without trying to be. Tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that spoke of actual work rather than tennis and golf. I'm fine, though I think my tomatoes took the worst of it. An identical man approached, shaking his head. Adrian, you just mowed down a customer. Mom would be horrified. This is my brother Alexander, the first man said, his cheeks slightly red. And I'm Adrian. We're opening a restaurant, and I was apparently too focused on finding decent produce to watch where I was walking. Victoria Ashford, I replied, noting that neither showed recognition at the name. And that's my sister Celeste approaching, probably wondering why I'm making friends with strangers instead of buying vegetables. When Celeste reached us, something subtle shifted in Alexander's posture. Not the predatory focus I'd learned to recognize in men who knew our net worth, but something quieter. Interest, maybe. Curiosity. We should probably let you get back to your shopping, Adrian said, though he didn't move away. But if you ever want to see what we do with produce like this, you're welcome at the soft opening next month. He handed me a simple business card. No gold embossing, no pretentious titles, just Montgomery's Kitchen and a phone number. Marcus launched his campaign 3 days later, appearing at my office with white roses and that practiced smile I now saw through completely. Victoria, I can't stop thinking about you since we met at the charity gala. I know this might seem forward, but would you have dinner with me? The irony was delicious. He was recycling the same romantic playbook, spending thousands on jewelry and expensive restaurants, all while thinking he was making progress toward $12 billion. That's very sweet, Marcus, I said, accepting the roses with calculated warmth. But I'm not really looking to complicate my life right now. The business takes most of my energy. The flash of frustration across his face was barely concealed. In our previous timeline, I'd been receptive immediately. Now he was having to work for every crumb of attention. David was pursuing Celeste with equal desperation and even less success. 3 dates in 2 months, each ending with her claiming she needed to focus on herself, while he spent increasingly outrageous amounts trying to impress her. I just want to make sure any man in my life is interested in me, not my trust fund, she told him, after he'd dropped $7,000 on a single evening that ended with a polite handshake. The panic in his eyes was beautiful. The restaurant's soft opening was everything Marcus's expensive dinners weren't. Understated, genuine, focused on substance over show. The space was small but thoughtfully designed, with exposed brick and warm lighting that made you want to stay for hours. Ye came, Adrian said when Celeste and I arrived, and his surprise seemed genuine. Not the calculated surprise of someone working an angle, but real pleasure at an unexpected gift. We promised we would, I replied, though I have to admit I'm curious about what you do with those tomatoes. The food was extraordinary. Not showy or elaborate, but each dish was perfect in its simplicity. These men understood their craft in a way that commanded respect. How did you learn to cook like this? Celeste asked Alexander during a quiet moment. Trial by fire, he said. When our parents died, Adrian and I were 16. Foster care wasn't ideal. We aged out at 18 with nothing but each other and whatever skills we could teach ourselves. The weight of real tragedy, real struggle, was so different from the manufactured hardships our previous husbands had used to manipulate us. There was no self-pity in Alexander's voice, no attempt to leverage sympathy into advantage. We worked every kitchen job we could find, Adrian added, refilling our wine glasses with wine that cost a tenth of what Marcus typically bought. Dishwasher, prep cook, line cook. Saved every penny for 8 years to open this place. 4 months into Marcus's increasingly expensive courtship, she made her appearance. Not as our grief counselor this time, but as Marcus's business consultant. Victoria, I'd love you to meet someone, Marcus said during one of our carefully rationed dates. This is Sophia Reeves. She's been helping me develop some investment strategies. There she was, same angelic face, same doe eyes, same honey voice wrapped around poison. Oh, how lovely to meet you, I said, studying her carefully. Marcus mentioned he was working with someone brilliant. You're too kind, Sophia replied, her voice trembling with manufactured shyness. I hope I'm not intruding. Marcus thought it might be nice for us to meet, since you're such an important part of his life. Over the following weeks, she began her familiar infiltration. Befriending Celeste through David, always appearing at the right moments with the right words of support. But this time, we were ready for her. I think it's so wise that you're taking things slowly, she told Celeste during a coffee meeting I'd arranged to be accidentally overheard. Wealthy women like yourselves have to be so careful. There are predators everywhere. The beautiful irony of a predator warning us about predators was not lost on either of us. You're absolutely right, Celeste agreed. That's why I value friends like you, Sophia. You seem to understand the unique challenges we face. The problem with the Montgomery brothers was that they were making it impossible to maintain emotional distance. Not through manipulation or calculated charm, but through simple decency. Adrian had started stopping by the farmer's market on Saturdays, not to pursue me, but because he genuinely enjoyed discussing seasonal produce and cooking techniques. Our conversations were easy, unforced, refreshingly free of any agenda beyond mutual interest in good food. You know, he said one morning as we examined early spring onions, you're the first person I've met who actually understands why proper knife work matters. My grandmother taught me, I replied, surprised by how comfortable I felt sharing real memories with him. She said if you're going to do something, do it right or don't do it at all. Smart woman. I would have liked to meet her. The simplicity of the statement, free of any attempt to extract information or advantage, caught me off guard. Marcus would have immediately asked about inheritance, about family wealth, about opportunities. Adrian just accepted the loss and moved on. Meanwhile, Alexander was having a similar effect on Celeste. He'd started bringing her books, not expensive first editions meant to impress, but worn paperbacks of authors he thought she'd enjoy, based on their conversations. He doesn't even know I went to Columbia for literature, she confided during one of our strategy meetings. He just pays attention to what I actually say and responds to it. That's unusual, I admitted, thinking of how different it was from our previous experience with men who saw us as prizes to be won, rather than people to be known. By month 6, our carefully maintained emotional walls were crumbling. Adrian had begun teaching me advanced cooking techniques during slow afternoons at the restaurant, his hands guiding mine as I learned to properly debone a fish, his patient corrections when I botched a sauce, the quiet pride in his eyes when I finally mastered a difficult technique. You're a natural, he said one afternoon, watching me plate a complex dish I'd prepared entirely myself. Have you ever considered that this might be more than just a hobby? The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to address. Working beside him felt more natural than any of the manufactured intimacies I'd shared with Marcus. 8 months into our new timeline, I hired the same private investigator who had helped us in our previous life. This time, I was ahead of the curve. What did you find? Celeste asked as we reviewed the files in my study. Everything, I replied, spreading photographs and documents across the desk. Sophia Reeves has been investigated in connection with 4 suspicious deaths in the past decade. All wealthy individuals, all involving food poisoning or accidents after they'd signed over financial control to new spouses or partners. The evidence was damning. Bank records, insurance claims, a pattern of behavior that painted a clear picture of systematic predation. And Marcus? 6 serious relationships in 10 years, all with independently wealthy women. 3 died under suspicious circumstances after granting him power of attorney. Celeste studied David's file with cold satisfaction. David's no better. He's got a history of targeting women through their charitable foundations, gets them to trust him with financial decisions, then systematically drains their accounts. This time, I said, closing the files, they won't get the chance. 9 months in, our investigation uncovered something that made my blood run cold. Sophia wasn't just a serial killer. She was connected to an international crime syndicate specializing in inheritance fraud. Marcus and David weren't just gold diggers. They were part of a larger network that had been systematically targeting wealthy families across 3 continents. "Look at this," Celeste said, pointing to a bank transfer record. Sophia received $2 million from an account in the Cayman Islands the day after the Pemberton sisters died. And there were similar transfers following each of her previous victims' deaths. The scope of the operation was staggering. They weren't just after our money. They were after our identities, our business contacts, our entire empire. The plan was to slowly take control of every aspect of our lives before eliminating us completely. "There's more," I said, my voice tight with fury. I found communications between Sophia and someone called the Architect. They've been planning this for over 2 years. Our parents' plane crash wasn't an accident. It was the opening move. The revelation hit us both like physical blows. Our parents had been murdered to set us up as vulnerable targets. Every tragedy in our lives had been orchestrated by these monsters. 10 months into our careful game, everything went sideways. Marcus, growing increasingly desperate as his expenses mounted and his progress stalled, decided to take drastic action. "Victoria, I have a surprise for you," he said during what I thought was just another expensive dinner. "There's something I need to show you. Something that will change everything between us." Every instinct screamed danger, but I needed to see how far he was willing to go. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go with him. He drove me to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The moment we stopped, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. "Get out," he said, and for the first time, his mask was completely gone. The charming facade had vanished, replaced by cold calculation and barely contained violence. Inside the warehouse, Sophia was waiting with 2 men I didn't recognize, clearly hired muscle from her crime syndicate. David was there too, with Celeste bound to a chair, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. "Surprise," Sophia said, her sweet voice now dripping with venom. "We got tired of playing games. The plan was always to make this look like a kidnapping gone wrong," Marcus explained, as the hired men forced me into a chair beside my sister. 2 wealthy heiresses, grabbed for ransom, tragically killed when the deal went bad. So much more dramatic than simple food poisoning. "And so much more profitable," Sophia added, holding up a tablet showing our bank accounts. "Amazing what you can accomplish with the right passwords and a few forged signatures." They'd been planning this contingency all along. While we thought we were playing them, they'd been prepared for our resistance. What Marcus and his associates hadn't counted on was that Adrian and Alexander had been watching us more carefully than we'd realized. "Victoria never misses our Saturday market meetings," Adrian had told his brother when I failed to show up. "Something's wrong." They'd started tracking my movements weeks ago, not out of suspicion or possessiveness, but because they'd noticed the dangerous men orbiting our lives. Adrian's military background had taught him to recognize threats, and he'd been quietly investigating Marcus and David on his own. When I didn't return home that night, they contacted the authorities and began searching themselves. The GPS tracker on her car stopped moving at the warehouse district. Alexander reported to the police. But he and Adrian weren't waiting for official response. They were former special forces, a detail they'd never shared with us, and they knew how to handle situations like this. They breached the warehouse just as Sophia was preparing to inject us with a lethal dose of the same poison they'd used to kill us in our previous life. The fight was swift and brutal. Adrian moved with lethal precision, taking down the hired muscle, while Alexander secured our safety and called for backup. These weren't just restaurant owners. They were trained killers who'd found peace in cooking, but hadn't forgotten how to wage war when necessary. Marcus tried to use me as a human shield, pressing a gun to my head while screaming demands. It was Adrian who ended it, with a single shot that dropped Marcus without harming me. "It's over," he whispered in my ear as he untied my bonds, his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded. "You're safe now." For the first time since our rebirth, I felt truly protected. In the aftermath, as police processed the crime scene and EMTs checked our injuries, Adrian and Alexander's true background emerged. Army Rangers, Adrian admitted when I asked about their combat skills. "We served 2 tours in Afghanistan before we got out and decided to pursue something more peaceful." "Why didn't you tell us?" Celeste asked, still shaky from her ordeal. "Because," Alexander replied, We wanted you to know us as we are now, not as we used to be. We've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. Opening the restaurant was about creating something beautiful instead of destroying things. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. In trying to escape violence, they'd found themselves right back in it to save us. The international investigation that followed exposed the full scope of Sophia's operation. 17 murders across 3 continents, over $200 million in stolen assets, and a network of accomplices that reached into the highest levels of several governments. Marcus survived his gunshot wound only to face multiple life sentences. David got 40 years. Sophia, when they finally caught her trying to flee to a non-extradition country, received life without parole. But more importantly, we discovered something that changed everything. Our parents had been investigating the same crime syndicate when they were killed. They'd left encrypted files hidden in the family estate, documenting their suspicions about the network that eventually targeted us. They knew, I said, reading through my father's hidden notes. They were trying to protect us by exposing the whole operation. And they succeeded, Celeste replied. Just not in the way they planned. 12 months after our second chance began, I stood in the expanded kitchen of Montgomery's, our restaurant now, since we'd become full partners after the brothers' lease fell through during the investigation. We'd saved their dream, and they'd literally saved our lives. The business partnership had evolved naturally into something deeper. Adrian and I had spent countless hours working side by side, rebuilding not just the restaurant, but our ability to trust. He'd seen me at my most vulnerable and most vengeful, and somehow loved me through all of it. How did you know? I asked him one evening as we closed the restaurant together. When we first met, how did you know we weren't like other wealthy women you might encounter? You talked to the vegetable vendor like he was a person, not help, he replied simply. You tipped the busboy more than most people spend on dinner. You cared about the quality of food, not just its price. Those aren't things you can fake. The observation cut deep because it was true. Marcus and David had never seen past our bank accounts, but Adrian and Alexander had seen us. And when did you know you were falling for me? I pressed, needing to understand when this beautiful, impossible thing had started. The first time you burned a sauce and laughed instead of getting angry, he said, pulling me close. Most people with your resources would have blamed someone else, demanded perfection, made it someone else's problem. You just shrugged and said, well, that's how we learn, and started over. Standing in his arms, I finally understood the difference between being wanted for what you have and being loved for who you are. The double wedding took place 18 months after our rebirth. In the gardens of our family estate, the same estate where we'd planned our revenge under the oak tree. But this time, we were planning a future instead of plotting destruction. You know, Celeste said as we stood together in our bridal suite, adjusting each other's veils, I never thought I'd trust anyone enough for this again. Neither did I admitted, smoothing her dress. But they're not them. They never were. Do you think our parents would approve? She asked. And I knew she was thinking about how different this was from our first weddings, the elaborate affairs that had been more about display than devotion. I think they'd love that we're marrying men who would die to protect us instead of men who tried to kill us for money, I replied. The ceremony was simple, elegant, and filled with people who genuinely cared about our happiness. Adrian's vows brought tears to my eyes, not because they were flowery or romantic, but because they were real. Victoria, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his gray eyes, you've taught me that courage isn't about facing bullets or bombs. It's about trusting someone with your heart even after it's been broken. You gave me that courage, and I promised to spend every day proving worthy of it. When I kissed him as his wife, I tasted possibility instead of poison, hope instead of deception, love instead of manipulation. Alexander's vows to Celeste were equally moving. You could have chosen bitterness after everything you've been through. Instead, you chose to build something beautiful. You chose to trust again. You chose me. I promise to make that choice worthwhile every single day for the rest of our lives. 5 years later, I wake up every morning in Adrian's arms, in the home we've built together above the restaurant, the same restaurant where we fell in love over prep work and late-night inventory, where we learned to trust each other's hearts as much as each other's knife skills. Downstairs, I can hear Celeste and Alexander getting ready for the morning service, their easy laughter floating up through the floors. She's pregnant with their second child, a boy this time, to join 3-year-old Emma, who has Alexander's eyes and Celeste's stubborn streak. Good morning, Mrs. Montgomery, Adrian murmurs against my neck, his hands sliding over my own growing belly. Our first child, due in 4 months. Good morning, Mr. Montgomery, I reply, turning in his arms to face the man who saved my life in every way that matters. We never speak of the first life anymore, Celeste and I. That timeline belongs to the past, to the naive women we used to be, who died in each other's arms on a dining room floor. Those women got justice, but these women got something better. They got love. Sometimes I catch Adrian watching me with an expression I can't quite read, as if he's seeing something beyond what's visible. When I ask, he just smiles and says he's grateful for whatever twist of fate brought me to that farmer's market on the exact day he needed to buy tomatoes. Do you believe in second chances? I asked him once, late at night when we were both too tired to sleep, but too content to move. I believe in you, he replied, which wasn't an answer, but somehow was everything I needed to hear. The restaurant is thriving, our family is growing, and for the first time in either of my lives, I'm not looking over my shoulder for the next betrayal. Instead, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, to the life we're building together, to the children who will never know their parents as anything other than deeply, completely in love. Parentheses. Always and forever, Cel. I whisper as I watch my sister through our adjoining kitchen windows, her hands covered in flour, as she teaches Emma how to make bread. She looks up and catches my eye, smiling that radiant smile that took years to fully return after everything we survived. /P. Always and forever, Vic, she mouths back. But this time, we're not just sisters bonded by shared trauma and the memory of poison burning through our veins. We are women who learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so beautiful, so real, so worth fighting for that the darkness can never touch it again. Beren. And every morning, when I wake up in Adrian's arms, with our child growing inside me, and the sound of our family's laughter echoing through our home, I know we got our revenge after all. We got to live. We got to love. We got to win.